Good morning, good afternoon, Australian expats. Welcome to another episode of the Expat Mortgage. My name is Jeremy Harper, your host for today. James Ridley, my co-host, is away for today, but we have a very special episode. We have an episode today talking about buying in Sydney's eastern suburbs and the inner west as an expat, so from overseas. And we have the good fortune of our guest, say, Munro Donen from Propertybuyer East. How are you, Munro? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good to be with you today.
So today we're going to be talking a little bit about your specialty, which is buying in your backyard, the eastern suburbs and the inner west. And I guess big picture, let's start about, what's happening post-budget. What are you seeing on the ground at the moment?
Thanks, Jeremy. What I'm actually seeing on the ground, so it's a very patchy market at the moment, as we know. There are a lot of mixed messages in the market at the moment. I say I don't buy Sydney, I don't buy houses in the eastern suburbs or properties. What I do is I buy individual properties in individual areas. I think the question is more about, is the market up or down? It's more about the type of property and the market we're actually working within. Because as you know, there are markets within markets, and then there's sub-markets within those markets and micro markets within those sub-markets. So I think what's happening, it depends on the type of the property, the particular micro market that we're working within, and what are we prepared to pay for that property, current conditions considered.
Okay, very good. So when you talk about markets within markets, do you want to give the listeners a bit of an example of a suburb?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think when we talk about markets within markets, if we're talking about the eastern suburbs or the inner west, we're not talking about the eastern suburbs. There's a very big difference whether we're talking about Paddington or Vaucluse or Bellevue Hill. And then again, you dig even further with if it's houses, there's different variations in the type of houses. Do they have views? Are they newly renovated? How big are the blocks? What is the size? What is the level of renovation? The same thing with apartments, exactly the same. Do they have views? Are they older buildings, newer buildings? Where is the location? Are they in high density zones? So, there's a lot of intricacies you're looking at. We're not looking at a general market. We're looking at very specific examples within a market. And that all depends on the client's requirements, Jeremy.
Yep. Okay. And so you talked about, maybe we'll drill into a couple of those examples. So like Vaucluse at the moment, how's that traveling or tracking at the moment? What are you seeing there?
Okay, it's interesting because Vaucluse has got I call it a two-pronged market. There are different houses in Vaucluse. The houses that face the west towards the city get the Opera House, the bridge, city views. Those ones are particularly premium properties, especially if they're nicely renovated and, they're in good condition. The views are everything as we know in Sydney. If they're on the other side of Vaucluse, looking towards the ocean's dark at night. The city, the Opera House, the bridge are what people pay for to see. And then, it could be something with no view at all. So it's very difficult. And I know we mentioned that medium price. Well, the medium price for Vaucluse, what is the medium price? The medium is the middle sale. It may not reflect every property because there can be properties from 4 million to 50 million, for example.
Yep.
So one's got to really qualify that more is what is recently sold in the area and how much has it sold for? And how does it compare to the property that we're considering?
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of, so you talked about the median, so that's really interesting. So maybe we'll dig into that a little bit. So you were saying it's the middle sale.
Yeah.
So what, you're saying you disregard that slightly. What are some of the things that you want to look for when you're looking at the performance of that suburb?
What I'm looking for the performance of that suburb is I'm looking at supply and demand.
Yep.
I'm looking at buyer profile. I'm looking at competition. I'm looking at the style of property and obviously the views. And I'm also looking at what has sold. What is the comparable? It's not a CoreLogic, RP data, push button comparable. It's comparing real comparables. And as a buyer's agent, it's my job to make sure I uncover and show those comparables in the best possible light, not being driven by the agent's comparables that they normally tell clients, because those comparables are taking them to a certain point where they want the property to be sold at or their vendors looking for. So we've got to be very transparent and we've got to make sure we do our homework properly.
That's interesting. So you're talking about, because we see a lot of that now, even myself and my team will generate CoreLogic reports for clients, but is there an opportunity within that where if people aren't digging into what's driving that data in that report, people may just take it on face value.
I think as a mortgage broker, you understand that it's very risky. I mean, if you're buying cookie cutter apartments in large high rise, there's much better comparables. Where you're dealing with those reports, generally a lot of the information can be 3 months old.
Mm.
So it's not relevant to the current market, and especially where we are at the moment. If you consider pre-budget and post-budget, we're working in a totally different space,
Yep.
which AI or CoreLogic, whatever it is, doesn't pick up. And the other thing is if a property was sold 20 or 30 years ago, how would it know if it's been renovated, updated, etc.? Because it's relying on past information, not current or future information.
Yep. Correct. And also in the area, what's happening sort of in the scape, is there schools being approved, if there's amenities being upgraded, shopping, access to restaurants, cafes, a lot of that gets missed as well.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah.
So we're talking, okay, so what about opportunities? Where we're seeing some opportunities at the moment?
The opportunities we're seeing at the moment is where we're actually seeing the market at the moment. I might preface that is that there has definitely been a change, a shift since the budget we've had. There is now, it's not only affecting investors because obviously the state of the economy, interest rates where they are at the moment, there is a sentiment is low. I
Mm.
suppose that's the best way to say it. When people are not in a positive headspace or sentiment is low, they don't react the same way when they're positive. So where we're seeing in the market at the moment, we're seeing that the auction clearance rates have dropped from last year.
Hmm.
We were probably around those early 50%. Last year, we we're probably around the 70. And just for readers' reference and listeners' reference, 60% is considered to be a stable market. 70% is considered to be a strong market, and 80% clearance is considered to be a boom market. So we're
Yep.
certainly below those numbers. If a client is ready to buy and qualified and ready to make that move, and everybody, people say to me, clients say to me, Munro, when should we be buying? You should be buying when the right property is there and when you've got your finance approved and you can make that decision. But
Mm.
yes, it is an opportunistic market at the moment. There are opportunities in the market. And with apartments, we're seeing anywhere between 15 and 25% reduction. And I'm comparing recently purchased properties where I've purchased in the eastern suburbs, where I'm comparing to very comparable properties within the same building that might have sold within the last 12 or 24 months. Houses is a little bit different because what we're seeing in the eastern suburbs is there's probably a bit of a hiatus between that 3 and 5 million. Under that,
Mm.
there seems to be good, strong activity. You can't get much there, as you know, in the eastern suburbs unless you're looking at the apartment market.
Yep.
And the prestige end, which is obviously supply is low, there is definitely a lot of buyers out there, that are ready to react and purchase. The houses, I'd say probably 10 to 15%, but apartments are, more in that 15 to 25% from the purchases I've made in the last few months.
Interesting. Interesting. I mean, I would add on to that, my backyard being the inner west. I think that sort of 2 to 3 mil range is still holding strong.
Absolutely.
There's definitely not a dip there because it all comes down to that buyer demand, as you said earlier, and people are wanting that type of property. So that's still holding up strong, but on that, when it gets a little bit higher on that higher market, there's some softness there.
Yeah, no, look, when you've absolutely nailed it there between that 2 to 3 million. I purchased a property in Erskineville for a client, beautifully renovated home. And it did go to auction, interestingly, even under current conditions, because there was strong buyer demand.
Yep.
I assessed that property somewhere between 2.4 and 2.5, nicely renovated. I had 5 competitors at the auction, and it was quite strongly contested. My client had a very reasonable budget, but we weren't prepared to pay more than 2.5 for that property. When you go to auction and you're buying a property, we're not going to be standing on the floor and be driven by emotion on the day of the auction. It's considering what the value is before the auction, deciding where we're going and acting accordingly. And if it means we move away rather than overpay, especially in a market like this, Jeremy, where there can be valuation shortfalls.
Yep. Correct. And in terms of, so you talked about the auction clearance rate, it doesn't tell the whole story. Obviously, volume is down, and that will be, I think, interestingly, volume is a leading indicator of where things are at, but that's going to have, and it's already having impacts on other parts of the economy. So that's going to be fascinating to see where that plays out over the next 12 months, particularly like, we're in New South Wales. It's having a huge impact on their revenue with stamp duty.
Yeah.
But, so we're seeing the type of transaction changing a little bit. So we're seeing a little bit more people of properties being sold off market and through privately negotiated versus going to
Yeah.
auction now.
I think, yeah, what you've just said is absolutely correct. We've seen a drop in the clearance rates, but what's very important is there are still transactions happening, and the
Yep.
media is not reporting what was sold pre-auction, what was sold. A lot of properties go to auction, they fail, and within a day or two they sold,
Yep.
to the highest bidder once a negotiation happens. They're off-market transactions, they're private transactions. So there are a number of transactions. The numbers are absolutely lower, but it's not as doom or gloom as it's made out to be.
Correct. And it comes down to vendor expectations as well, I think. And I'm not trying to sort of sling mud on any agents, but I have seen it where the agents sort of cook the campaign. Maybe they haven't set the expectations with the vendor up front. It's gone to auction, it hasn't gone through, and then they've basically just, it's a stale campaign and they've had to take a haircut to get that property sold when maybe they could have got a better deal a few weeks earlier if they sort of set the expectations properly. Are you finding, when you're speaking to the agents, are they, when they're working with the vendors, are they more open to setting more realistic expectations? Because obviously the market's different to say pre-Christmas to now.
Right. Yeah, so where we are in the market at the moment, a lot of the agents are complaining low stock levels. And if you have a look and see what's been coming up over the last few weeks, we usually have the September, it's a very hot market in September. There's usually a lot of stock. I'm not seeing a lot of quality stock coming available at the moment because also what's happening with vendors where vendors might have gone to a pre-market or off-market campaign to test the market. That's not happening so much anymore because the market is, it's not flying, so they're not testing the market. And agents are really wanting to work with qualified vendors who are motivated to sell. So death, divorce, upgrading, they bought somewhere else. They're not just trying to test the market. I think
Mm.
that's really important. And as you said earlier, an agent will go to market if they have competition. They are working for their vendor, and that is their job. People get very irritated with agents, but they're never working for the buyer. They're always
Correct.
working for their vendor, for their seller. So they go to auction for two reasons, Jeremy. They're going to auction because obviously they have competition to drive the price. And the other thing is they might need to recondition their vendor. Their vendor is not accepting where the market is,
Hmm.
and the market will speak. Now, the difficulty is if a property was appraised, pre-budget and it came on after the budget, it was appraised in one market, it's coming to the market in a completely different market. And the expectation, so it's a difficult job for the agent to go back because they don't want to lose their listings, obviously. And it's tight and they are competing with each other for listings. So they're trying to obviously sell it the best way they can to their vendor. So it's tricky at the moment. Yes, absolutely. And, it's even more important. You actually have to know what you're doing, even in a softer market.
Definitely, definitely. Okay, and so just changing gears slightly, I want to talk about some of the, I guess, the information gap that some expats that may be listening to this. What are some things that, we need to be asking around? Okay, if someone's listening to this and they're based in Dubai right now today, listening to this podcast, and they're wanting to get more information, what are some questions they should be asking?
Well, I think the first question they should be asking is if they're asking the agent what the guide price is, that's going to give them an indication. I wouldn't, as a buyer, be giving an agent too much information.
Hmm.
The more you share, if you've got 5 million and I've got 6 million, I'm going to get the first call. And agents work that way, and so they should because they're working in the best interest of their clients. So the very important thing is to understand is, do we want this property?
Hmm.
Importantly, have we done our due diligence? Do we know if this is a good build? Do we know if this is a good street? Do we know what else is sold in the market? What else can we buy with our budget if we don't buy this one? Have we seen everything available? Yes, portals are great because they give you access to properties, but a buyer's agent will get you a lot more properties. And the kind of thing people will say, agents will say to clients, we have off markets. Well, an off market is not an off market in inverted commas when you're giving the same property to 3,000 people. You
Mm.
know, it's going out and their job is to drive it. They're never going to work with one buyer unless they're obviously prepared to pay a very, very high price, for that property. So it's understanding what is sold, where it's sold, what are the comparables, what are the situation that suits their particular requirements. And if we lose this one, are we prepared to walk away and find something else that's potentially better? And as you know, being tens and thousands of miles away is really difficult because you can't really understand the market. The media, the advertising, all that is designed to make the properties look good. So
Yep.
is it a good property? What are we witnessing in the market? What is it really worth? What else can we buy for our budget? How strong is the competition? And also, more importantly, should we actually buy it?
Should we buy it? Yeah,
Yeah.
correct. And I think that just comes back to sort of, what's their goal with this property? Is it eventually to live in? Then potentially they have a really good understanding of that area, or they may not, or maybe that they haven't lived in that area for 20, 30 years. And that sort of goes to the next point around, understanding, okay, if you're trying to buy in Sydney, but you haven't lived here for 20 years, things have changed. And so if we were to say top couple of items that we really should be mindful of, what are those things that could put someone off where they've settled on a property, but they've bought in that area because that's where maybe they grew up 20 years ago, but things have changed. What are the things that put people off?
Well, very interestingly, I'll give you a couple of points and I'll also give you an example, which is fantastic. So a lot of people that haven't been in Sydney for 20, 30 years, as we know, they're buying with outdated mental map of Sydney. So what you knew Sydney as 20 or 30 years ago is not the Sydney you know today.
Mm,
Obviously, there's infrastructure changes, areas change, zoning changes. It might have been a grungy area before, an area that wasn't favorable. People didn't like it. Demographic changes, who's living there these days. Understanding all those things is really, really important. And buyer preferences also change. So a perfect example is I bought for an expat who was looking in the Bronte area. And we had a very substantial budget into the early 10 millions. We were looking at a number of properties. We looked at a few. They were problematic properties. They hadn't been well renovated. And we always get an independent builder in, so we don't rely on those reports provided by the vendor. And they were coming up with a number of issues. And I then saw a fantastic opportunity that had been on the market for a while in South Coogee, Maroubra area, Lurline Bay, that had absolutely gun barrel ocean views, north facing, which you don't get that in Bronte, so many of those.
mm,
And my client hadn't lived in Sydney for 30 years. And she said, Munro, Maroubra, are you being serious? And, I sent her some demographics and some information. They'd flown into Sydney a couple of weeks later. I took them around. I showed it to her and she could not believe what she was seeing and the type of properties and what she could actually buy for less than her budget. She loved the lifestyle. So, it's myself, I nearly bought in Maroubra 15 years ago and I was going to buy in a certain area of Maroubra, which I knew would evolve and change. And all my friends talked me out of it that lived in the area and said
yeah.
to me, don't touch it. This is like bra boy territory. You'll get murdered there kind of thing. But that's all changed. So places do change and buying when you left Sydney, the way you
Mm.
saw it is probably not the best way. Get the latest information and then make an informed decision.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. That's a great point. And so to talk to you about, so I guess a question for you would be, if I'm an expat, should I be waiting if the prices are falling, or, what are your thoughts there?
Okay, so it's really what's right for you at the time. If you've got the finance and you can go ahead, what is your situation? Your job has changed. You've got a job in Sydney. You're moving to Sydney. The kids want to go to school. You want to set up your family. It's really your personal situation where you are. But it is a time if you're mentally and financially prepared to move forward. I think that's probably the most important thing. There are opportunities in the market.
Yep.
You need to understand the market, the nuances and what's going on in the market because it does change literally every day today. People
Yep.
will say to me, Munro, our price is going to fall more. Well, I can't guarantee that. But what I can say to people is over the last 50 years, properties have doubled every 10 years in the eastern suburbs and inner west. We had some phenomenal growth, probably around 20% in the last 2 years. where properties were going up 0.5 to 0.8% per month.
Mm.
Back in COVID, we were seeing $30,000 to $50,000 a day. It was ridiculous. So, taking all those things into account and looking for the opportunity, buying well and making sure you don't overpay. So I think the biggest issue with expats is they wouldn't want to be buying wrong, number one, because it's a very expensive mistake to make.
Yep.
And second of all, you don't want to be overpaying because you're being guided by an agent who has a vested motivation to be able to achieve the highest price. So, everything, it's time in the market, not trying to time the market, as we know. And I've never had a client, Jeremy, that's come back to me 10 years later, and I've done this for 25 years. I've never had a client come back to me 10 years later and say, Munro, I think we overpaid for that property.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. No, that's a very good point. And in terms of, so if I'm listening and I'm not too familiar at the moment with where Sydney's at, if we're comparing the eastern suburbs to the inner west, what are you thinking as is a better space for people to buy into, or do you think there's various factors?
No, absolutely. There are various factors because it depends on a client's budget.
Mm-hmm.
So if a client's got a budget of around about 1.5 to 2.5 million, they're not going to be able to find a lot in housing in the eastern suburbs. You can probably find, close to that 2.5 million, probably a rundown property around East Lakes, Pagewood, Botany, but that's not where a lot of expats want to come back to. They want to be in the premium suburbs. So if you're looking at the Marrickville, Erskineville, Alexandria, which is more like inner east, inner west situation, with that budget, you're getting a proper semi with decent land and a proper home, well renovated. So it really does depend on their budget, the lifestyle. Do they want an apartment or a house? They might get the apartment in Vaucluse and the house in Erskineville, for example. Are they looking to invest? Are they looking for capital growth? Are they looking for rental yields? And also, what is their family situation and what is their horizon? Do they need to buy now? Are they happy to wait? But also, waiting is a very difficult one because you don't want to be buying when everybody's talking positive.
Yep.
Because we only know that after the event. We never know that before the event. So
Yep.
buying good property in a good location with good demand, with good rentability, the fundamentals, Jeremy, haven't changed.
No.
Even for
And
investors.
and I remember when the start of during COVID, there was that just everyone sat still and then you could feel the momentum. And for a lot of these people that sat back waiting
Yeah.
for the bottom, they missed it. And then during COVID, that's when people started to get the FOMO and pile back in. 6 months later, by that stage, the market started to run up. And then that's when people are starting to overpay because they're just going above and above where the market's at. So no, I
Yeah.
think you're spot on.
And there's also different times buying in the market as well, Jeremy, as people understand in most countries, winter is generally in the market.
Hmm.
Holidays are usually a slower time. And in Sydney, obviously our summer period, spring, summer is usually where we go. So we're now in August, September. Late September is probably the last release of stock coming to the market because what happens if it's not sold, obviously middle of November, we seem to switch off in Sydney till the end of January. It's an interesting observation. But there are great deals to be done in that time because if stock hasn't sold or there's a vendor looking to bring a property to market maybe in January, February, but they're nervous of the market and there's a potential buyer out there, the agent might say, let's get this sold before January if there's negative sentiment. And what I'm finding with a lot of people at the moment is they don't want to make that first offer. Everybody's waiting for somebody else to make that because you don't want to bid against yourself.
Yeah.
So it's very important, when an agent says, give me an offer or I've got an offer, they don't actually legally have to disclose that offer in writing. They can give it to you verbally. So it's really important you understand value, you understand the suburb, you understand any risk that needs to be mitigated around that suburb. You don't know if there's going to be an apartment building built next door, the house you're paying $10 million for. There's a
Yeah.
house on the market in Bellevue Hill at the moment where they're looking for close to $80 million. It's a brand new build and there's a block of apartments next door. That's really not very attractive, but the house is amazing. So, people need to understand these things and just looking online or going to ChatGPT or going to Google or whatever, it doesn't give you all that information. As you know, when you're using AI, if you don't ask the right questions, it's going to tell you what you want to hear anyway.
Exactly. Yep. No, that's landing people in a bit of trouble. Okay, and so you've talked about a bit of a softer market. So when we think about a buyer's agent, what's the value proposition in a softer market?
Okay, so in a stronger market, we all know the intense competition, people lose out. They need a buyer's agent, to either get off market, access off
Yep.
markets, which are not always the best deals. I'd like to qualify that. In the more uncertain environment, information's important. Asset selection's important. Appraisal, the property price or value. I can't call it a valuation because I'm not a valuer. I can appraise a property, which is like a valuation.
Yep.
Getting access to those properties, negotiating, knowing when to buy and when to walk away. The biggest, issue is not the buyer's agent's fee. It's more about overpaying for a property or buying the wrong property, I think is the biggest risk.
Yep. And you're going to see a lot of this in a couple of years' time when people start reviewing all those properties they bought in their SMSFs. People were just buying properties inside their self-made super fund just to reach that before the cutoff period. Not
Yeah.
looking at the quality of the asset, not looking at all these variables you're talking about, but just
Yeah.
trying to get a property, which is that's where you can do yourself in really under
Yeah,
that
you don't,
circumstance.
Jeremy, you never want to be buying when everybody else is chasing and trying to buy the same thing.
Yep.
Because if I look at when I purchased for clients, and you mentioned COVID, late 2020, 2021, a lot of the properties I'm seeing now coming back to the market that were sold in that 2021 period are not trading for a lot more than when they sold then, unless they've been substantially changed. So, don't chase when everybody else is going. Go in the opposite direction. Just buy well, buy good property in good location. And just when you're an expat, it's very hard to do it from 10,000 miles away. Have a trusted person on the ground. Have boots on the ground. Have somebody that can turn around and say to you, let's walk away. But don't worry, we'll find you something else. Because that's the biggest
Yep.
fear. If we lose this, well, what do we do? You can't fly into Sydney every weekend, even if you're coming from Asia. You need somebody on the ground. And I've worked with a lot of expats. I love working with expats, just to mention, because, I can offer them so much value that they wouldn't be able to do on their own from a distance.
Yep. Fantastic. And so I guess to wrap it up, 5 key messages that we want to just put a bow on. So number one, so there's markets within markets.
Correct?
The median prices are context, so they're not the valuation. As you said before, look at other leading indicators, do your homework. Quality still attracts competition, so good property is selling. And I think it's going to be interesting on the backdrop of higher construction costs. What does that
Yeah.
mean for properties that need serious amount of work? They probably won't sell well in this environment. So that's a really good key point. Lower auction clearance rates does not mean it's not selling, as you said. So looking at off market, things being sold, negotiated for pre and post auction, and they're still selling, but obviously the volume overall is down. And then expats having that information to make sure that you're not disadvantaged even though you're outside of Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. That's correct. So, I mean, that takes it really in a nutshell. Do your homework, mitigate the risk, and do it the best way possible and take advantage of, where others fear to tread.
Yeah, well said. Well, Munro, thank you very much for your time. Very informative, some great tips around if we're looking to buy into the eastern suburbs or the inner west of Sydney. I'll put your contact details in the show notes. So if anyone has any questions off the back of this, we'll have your email address so they can reach out to you directly for any discussions, or they can have a chat with you offline as well, correct?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeremy. I really appreciate it. And, I'm the kind of buyer's agent. I'm not here to push people into things. I love sharing information. Most expats, I'll have 3 or 4 or 5 calls with them before they even engage, because, it's important that they understand what they're doing, what I say in property, you need to know what to do, when to do, and how to do it.
Yeah.
And, it's important that you have somebody you can trust and somebody who's got experience. It's not only the person that buys $50 million homes. It's the person that's got experience working with the expat market.
Yeah, well said. Great. Well, everyone, thank you very much for your time. Please stay tuned. Just a bit of a shout out. We do have in September the upcoming webinar with myself and Ben Turner talking about the tax and finance implications of the post-budget and purchasing properties in expats. So please register for that. But until next episode, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy. Lovely to chat with you today. Take care.